My father-in-law broke my son's arm in 3 places. Police said, he's a retired judge. No one will prosecute. I smiled, walked to my safe, pulled out a satellite phone I hadn't touched since Afghanistan. I dialed a number scratched into the back. A voice answered in Pashto. I said the debt is called. He replied, consider it paid. 48 hours later, my father-in-law disappeared from his cabin. They found his car. They never found him. Before we begin, please subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab for more stories. Now let's begin. The Saturday afternoon sun filtered through the kitchen window as Derek McConnell watched his son, Ethan, carefully measure flour into a mixing bowl. The kid's tongue stuck out slightly in concentration, the same way Derek's did when he was focused on a task. At 9 years old, Ethan was already showing signs of the methodical thinking Derek had tried to instill in him. Dad, is this enough? Ethan asked, holding up the measuring cup. Perfect, buddy. Now the eggs. Derek leaned against the counter, arms crossed, a small smile on his face. These moments, quiet, normal, domestic, they were what he'd fought for overseas. What he'd promised himself he'd build when he finally got out. That was 12 years ago. 12 years since he'd left the sand and blood behind. 12 years since he'd traded his rifle for a contractor's tool belt and started building houses instead of breaking down doors. He'd met Erica at a friend's wedding 3 months after coming home. She was a physical therapist, warm and grounded in a way that had pulled him back to earth when the nightmares were still fresh. The front door opened, and Erica's voice carried through the house, but there was a tension in it that made Derek's old instincts flare. Derek? We're here. We're. Not I'm. Derek's jaw tightened slightly. He knew that tone, that careful, walking on eggshells tone she used when her father was with her. Vernon Tate entered the kitchen first, his 6-foot frame still imposing despite his 72 years. 30 years on the bench had given him a bearing that demanded deference, and he'd never learned to turn it off. His eyes swept the room with the same critical gaze he'd once used on defendants. Making a mess, I see, Vernon said, glancing at the flour dusted across the counter. We're making cookies, Grandpa, Ethan said brightly, oblivious to the undercurrent in the room. Cookies. Vernon's tone suggested he was pronouncing sentence on a particularly distasteful crime. Erica tells me you've been teaching the boy to cook instead of signing him up for baseball like I suggested. Ethan wanted to learn to bake, Derek said evenly. I'm teaching him what he wants to learn. The boy needs structure, discipline. Sports build character. Vernon moved closer to the counter, and Derek noticed Erica hovering in the doorway, her mother Marcia behind her, both women wearing identical expressions of quiet anxiety. He's building character just fine, Derek replied, keeping his voice neutral. He'd learned early in his marriage that engaging with Vernon's provocations led nowhere good. The old man thrived on confrontation, especially in his own domain, which, as far as Vernon was concerned, extended to his daughter's household. Vernon picked up the recipe card Ethan had been following, his lip curling slightly. Chocolate chip. Simple enough even for a McConnell, I suppose. The jab was typical Vernon. Casual cruelty dressed up as humor. Derek had endured worse in interrogation rooms in Kandahar. He could handle a bitter old man's insults. Vernon, why don't we sit in the living room? Marcia said softly, finally entering the kitchen. She was a wisp of a woman, worn down by decades of marriage to a man who viewed life as a courtroom where he was always presiding. I'm talking to my grandson, Vernon said dismissively. He turned his attention to Ethan. Son, you're 9 years old. That's old enough to understand that men don't belong in kitchens. Your father should be teaching you useful skills. I like cooking, Ethan said, his voice smaller now. Derek saw his son's shoulders hunch slightly, and something hot flared in his chest. You like it because you haven't been shown better options, Vernon continued. He reached out and took the measuring cup from Ethan's hand. Your grandfather was a Marine. Did you know that? He understood discipline, pride, not this domestic nonsense. Derek stepped forward, his voice quiet, but carrying an edge that made Marcia flinch. Vernon, give the cup back to Ethan. I'm having a conversation with my grandson. You're criticizing him for wanting to spend time with his father, Derek interrupted. giving the cup back. Now, for a moment, the kitchen hung in tense silence. Vernon's face colored, that particular shade of red Derek had learned to recognize as dangerous. The old man's ego couldn't tolerate being contradicted, especially not in front of witnesses. "You don't give me orders in my daughter's house," Vernon said, his voice dropping to the authoritative rumble that had cowed attorneys for 3 decades. "It's actually my house," Derek replied calmly. "My name on the mortgage. And I'm asking you, politely, to let my son finish what he was doing." Erica moved into the kitchen now, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "Dad, Derek, please. Let's not do this. Not today." Vernon's eyes never left Derek's face. The old man was measuring him, the way he'd measured every person who'd ever stood in his courtroom, looking for weakness, for submission. He wouldn't find it. Derek had stared down enemy combatants, had negotiated with tribal leaders who could have him killed with a word, had walked into compounds not knowing if he'd walk out. A retired judge with a superiority complex didn't intimidate him. But for Erica's sake, for the peace of his home, Derek didn't escalate. He simply held Vernon's gaze until the old man looked away first, setting the measuring cup down with a dismissive gesture. "I don't know what my daughter sees in you," Vernon muttered. There it is, Derek thought. The real issue. It had never been about Ethan or the cookies or anything else. It was about Derek himself, a contractor with a high school education and a past Vernon had never deemed good enough for his daughter. Never mind that Derek had served his country. Never mind that he'd built a successful business, provided a good home, treated Erica with love and respect. None of it mattered to Vernon Tate, because Derek didn't have a law degree and a country club membership. "Mom, Dad, I think it's time for you to go," Erica said quietly. Vernon's head snapped toward his daughter. "Excuse me? I asked you to come for a nice visit, and you've spent the entire time criticizing Derek and Ethan. I won't have it." Derek heard the tremor in his wife's voice, knew what that confrontation cost her. Erica had spent her whole life seeking her father's approval, trying to be the perfect daughter for a man incapable of giving unconditional love. "Erica Louise Tate," Vernon began. "McConnell," Erica corrected, her voice firmer now. "It's been McConnell for 10 years, Dad." Vernon's face went through several shades of red before settling on a dangerous crimson. He looked at Derek with undisguised contempt. "You've turned my daughter against me, poisoned her mind against her own family. I think you've managed that all on your own," Derek said quietly. The old man's hand came up, finger pointing at Derek's chest. "You don't have any idea who you're dealing with, son. I have friends in the city. Connections. I could make your life very difficult." "Is that a threat, Judge Tate?" Derek asked, and he let just enough steel into his voice to remind Vernon that despite the tool belt and the flour-dusted kitchen, Derek McConnell was not a man to be threatened. Something flickered in Vernon's eyes, a hint of uncertainty, perhaps even recognition that he'd pushed too far. But pride wouldn't let him back down. "It's a promise," Vernon said. "Nobody disrespects me in my daughter's home." "Then it's fortunate you're leaving," Derek replied. Marcia finally found her voice, tugging at Vernon's arm. "Vernon, please. Let's just go." For a long moment, Derek thought the old man might actually take a swing at him. He was ready for it, body balanced, weight centered. But Vernon just turned on his heel and stalked toward the door, Marcia scurrying after him. Before leaving, Vernon paused and looked back at Ethan, who'd been watching the whole exchange with wide eyes. "Your father is teaching you to be weak, boy. Remember that." Then he was gone, the front door slamming hard enough to rattle the picture frames on the wall. Erica sagged against the counter, tears streaming down her face. Derek went to her immediately, pulling her into his arms while Ethan stood frozen by the mixing bowl. "I'm sorry," Erica whispered against his chest. "I'm so sorry. I thought maybe this time." "It's not your fault," Derek murmured, stroking her hair. "It's never been your fault." Over his wife's shoulder, Derek saw his son's confused face, and he felt the familiar anger rise up again. Ethan shouldn't have to witness this. Shouldn't have to hear his grandfather's poison. Later that night, after Ethan was asleep and Erica had cried herself exhausted on the couch, Derek stood in his garage, staring at a locked cabinet in the back corner. Inside were things he hadn't touched in years. awards and citations he'd never displayed, a few photos from his time overseas, and buried beneath all of it, wrapped in oilcloth, a satellite phone he'd been given by a man whose life he'd saved in a village outside Kandahar. "Keep it, Khalid had said. If you ever need anything at all, you call this number. The debt can never be repaid, but it can be honored." Derek had never made that call, never intended to. That part of his life was over. He turned away from the cabinet and went back inside to check on his family. 2 weeks passed with an uneasy peace. Erica called her mother a few times, brief conversations where Marcia assured her that Vernon was just being Vernon and would come around eventually. Derek doubted it, but he didn't push. Erica needed to manage her relationship with her parents in her own way. The following Saturday, Derek was in his workshop behind the house, teaching Ethan how to properly sand a piece of wood they'd cut for a birdhouse project. It was exactly the kind of afternoon Derek lived for. Quality time with his son, passing on skills, watching the kid's face light up when he got something right. The knock on the workshop door was sharp, authoritative. Derek's instincts prickled before he even turned around. Vernon Tate stood in the doorway, and Derek immediately noticed two things. The old man had been drinking, and he was alone. "Judge Tate," Derek said carefully, setting down his own piece of sandpaper. "Eric is inside." "I'm not here for my daughter," Vernon said, his words slightly slurred. "I'm here for the boy." "Grandpa," Ethan said, brightening despite the awkward last visit. Kids were resilient that way, always ready to give another chance. "Ethan, go inside and find your mother," Derek said quietly. "But Dad, we're not finished." "Now, Ethan." Something in Derek's tone made his son move immediately. Ethan slipped past Vernon, who watched him go with an unreadable expression. "You're drunk," Derek observed once they were alone. "I've had a few drinks," Vernon admitted. "Doesn't change the facts. Doesn't change what I've been thinking about for 2 weeks." "And what's that?" Vernon stepped fully into the workshop, his bulk seeming to fill the small space. "You got my daughter convinced you're some kind of hero. Military service, built your own business, playing the role of perfect husband and father." Derek didn't respond, just watched the old man circle the room like a predator. "But I've been doing some research," Vernon continued. "Called in some favors. Found out about your time in Afghanistan. Not just regular military, were you? Special operations. The kind of things they don't put in official records." Derek felt his body go very still. "That's classified information, Judge. You shouldn't be accessing it. I was on the bench for 30 years. I know people in every agency you can imagine. And what I found out about you." Vernon's lip curled. "You're not a hero. You're a killer. A government assassin who came home and decided to play house." "I served my country," Derek said quietly. "Did things that needed doing. Saved American lives." "You murdered people," Vernon spat. "And now you're around my grandson, teaching him your twisted values, turning him soft while pretending to be some kind of role model. I think you should leave." "I'm not finished." Vernon's hand shot out, gripping the edge of Derek's workbench. "I've tolerated this farce of a marriage because Erica made her choice. But I will not stand by while you corrupt my grandson. He needs a real man's influence, not a broken soldier playing carpenter." Derek's hands clenched at his sides. Every instinct he'd honed over years of combat and tactical operations told him to end this confrontation quickly and decisively. But this was his wife's father. This was a 72-year-old man who, despite his venom, didn't actually pose a physical threat. "Judge Tate, you said what you came to say. Now, leave my property before I call the police." Vernon laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "The police? In this city? I've had dinner with the police chief every month for 20 years. I presided over cases involving half the force. You think they'd choose you over me?" It was the arrogance in his voice that decided Derek. This man had spent so long wielding power, using his position to intimidate and control, that he'd forgotten there were people who couldn't be intimidated. "Nevertheless, you need to leave." "Or what?" Vernon challenged, stepping closer. "You'll use some of those killer skills on old man? That would play well in court. I make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of monster you really are." The sound of the back door opening interrupted them. Erica appeared, Ethan beside her, both of them looking alarmed. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Erica asked. Vernon's demeanor shifted instantly, his face arranging itself into an expression of paternal concern. "I came to apologize for my behavior the other week. I wanted to make amends with Derek and spend some time with my grandson." It was such a blatant lie that Derek almost admired the audacity. This was what Vernon Tate did. He wielded different faces for different audiences, always playing whatever role served his purposes. "That's not what you were just," Derek began, but Erica's hopeful expression stopped him. She wanted so badly to believe her father could change. "Dad, that's wonderful," Erica said, smiling through her uncertainty. "Why don't you come inside? We can all talk." "Actually," Vernon said, his eyes never leaving Derek's face, "I was hoping to take Ethan out for the afternoon. Get some one-on-one time with my grandson. Take him to the batting cages, get some ice cream. Man's afternoon out." Derek opened his mouth to refuse, but Ethan was already bouncing with excitement. "Can I, Dad? Please." Every tactical sense Derek possessed screamed at him to say no. But Erica was looking at him with such hope, and Ethan was eager, and refusing would make Derek look like the unreasonable one. "I don't think that's a good idea," Derek said carefully. "See," Vernon said to Erica, "your husband doesn't even trust me with my own grandson. What does that tell you?" "Derek," Erica said quietly, a note of pleading in her voice. "It's just a few hours." Derek looked at his son's excited face, at his wife's desperate hope for family reconciliation, and felt the trap closing around him. If he refused, he'd be the villain in Erica's eyes. If he agreed, he'd be sending his son off with a drunk, bitter man who'd just spent 10 minutes tearing Derek apart. "1 hour," Derek said finally. "And you stay in public places. The batting cages, ice cream, that's it." Vernon smiled, and there was something predatory in it. "Of course. You have my word as a judge." They'd been gone 30 minutes when Derek's phone rang. The display showed a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. McConnell?" The voice was professional, female, tense. "This is Regional Hospital. Your son was brought in by ambulance. You need to come right away." Derek's world narrowed to a single point. "What happened?" "There was an incident at the batting cages. His arm." "You need to come now, sir." Derek drove with the kind of focus that came from muscle memory, the way he'd driven in convoy formations, scanning for threats, calculating angles. Erica sat rigid in the passenger seat, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. They found Ethan in the emergency room, his small body dwarfed by the hospital bed, his right arm already in a temporary splint. Tears streaked his face, but he wasn't crying anymore, just staring at the ceiling with a glassy-eyed look of someone in shock. "Baby!" Erica rushed to his side, and that's when Ethan started crying again, deep sobs that shook his whole body. Vernon stood in the corner, his face pale, hands shaking slightly. "It was an accident," he said immediately. "I was showing him the proper batting stance, and he moved wrong, and..." Derek looked at his son's arm, at the unnatural angle even beneath the splint, and then at Vernon. The old man's eyes skittered away. "What happened, Ethan?" Derek asked quietly, kneeling beside the bed. "Grandpa said I was holding the bat wrong," Ethan whispered. "He grabbed my arm to fix it, but I tried to pull away because he was hurting me, and he got mad and yanked harder, and I felt it snap, and..." "That's not what happened," Vernon interrupted loudly. The boy's confused in shock. "He fell." "I didn't fall." Ethan's voice rose to a wail. "You broke my arm, Grandpa. You broke it." A doctor entered then, a tired-looking woman in her 50s. "Mr. and Mrs. McConnell? I'm Dr. Patrice Estes. We've done x-rays. Your son has a compound fracture of the radius in 3 places. It's going to require surgery." "3 places?" Derek repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Dr. Estes glanced at Vernon, then back at Derek. Her expression was carefully neutral in the way of medical professionals who've seen too much. "Yes, the break pattern is unusual. Typically we'd see this kind of damage from a fall from significant height or a car accident, not from a batting cage incident." Derek turned slowly to look at Vernon. The old man's face had gone from pale to ashen. "He fell," Vernon insisted, "tripped on his own feet. The boy is clumsy." "Did my son fall?" Derek asked Dr. Estes. The doctor hesitated, choosing her words carefully. There are no contusions, scrapes, or impact injuries consistent with a fall. The fracture pattern suggests torsion, a twisting force applied to the arm. Yank, Derek thought. Hard enough to break bone in 3 places. Hard enough to require surgery. He looked at his 9-year-old son, pale and trembling in a hospital bed, and something cold and final crystallized in his chest. I'm calling the police, Derek said. Don't be ridiculous, Vernon said quickly. It was an accident. These things happen with children. You broke my son's arm in 3 places, Derek said, his voice so calm it scared even him. That's assault on a minor. Battery. And given your size and his age, probably felony charges. Vernon's expression shifted, the mask of concern dropping away to reveal something ugly beneath. Now you listen to me, Derek. I am a retired district court judge. I have friends in the DA's office, in the police department, in every level of this city's government. You want to file charges? Go ahead. See how far you get. Dad, Erica said weakly, still holding Ethan's good hand. How could you? It was an accident. Erica, tell your husband to stand down before he makes this worse for everyone. Derek pulled out his phone and dialed 911. Watched Vernon's face as he reported the assault. Watched the old man's confidence waver, then return. The police arrived 20 minutes later. 2 officers, one older veteran named Greg Fletcher, one younger patrol officer named Anthony Beck. Derek explained what happened, showing them Ethan's injuries, repeating his son's account. Officer Fletcher took notes, his face impassive. When Derek finished, the older cop closed his notebook and sighed. Mr. McConnell, I understand you're upset. Any father would be. But you're talking about Vernon Tate here. Judge Tate. Retired, Derek said. Still, the man spent 30 years on the bench. He's well respected in this community. And from what I'm hearing, this sounds like an unfortunate accident. My son said he grabbed him and twisted his arm until it broke. Derek said, fighting to keep his voice level. Your son is 9 years old and scared and in pain. Fletcher replied, not unkindly. Kids that age don't always remember things clearly, especially when they're traumatized. Judge Tate says the boy fell. That's consistent with a sporting accident. The doctor said the injuries aren't consistent with a fall. Fletcher glanced at Dr. Estes, who'd been standing quietly nearby. She met his gaze, but said nothing. With all due respect to the medical professional, Fletcher said, I've been a cop for 26 years. Accidents happen at batting cages all the time, without witnesses saying otherwise, without any physical evidence of intentional harm. This is a he said situation involving a respected retired judge and a frightened child. Derek felt the rage building in his chest, but he kept it contained. So you're not going to pursue charges. I'm saying that based on the evidence, no DA in this city will prosecute Judge Tate. Even if I file a report, and I will, because it's protocol, it won't go anywhere. Fletcher's voice dropped lower. Between you and me, Judge Tate has connections you can't imagine. You push this, it'll just make your life harder. Vernon, who'd been silent during this exchange, stood a little straighter. The confidence was back in his posture. I appreciate your understanding, Officer Fletcher, Vernon said. This has been traumatic for all of us, especially my grandson. I hope Derek and I can move past this for the family's sake. Derek looked at the cop, at Vernon's smug face, at his son crying in the hospital bed, and understood with crystal clarity that the system would not help him. That justice, real justice, would not come from badges and courtrooms. Thank you for your time, officers, Derek said quietly. After they left, Vernon approached Derek, his voice low enough that Erica and Ethan couldn't hear. I told you I have connections. I told you I could make your life difficult. Maybe now you'll show me the respect I deserve. Derek met the old man's eyes and said nothing. There was nothing to say. Not yet. But that night, after Ethan's surgery, after they brought him home and settled him in bed with pain medication, after Erica had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep on the couch beside their son, Derek went to his garage. He opened the locked cabinet, pulled out the satellite phone, unwrapped it from the oilcloth. His hands didn't shake as he powered it on for the first time in 12 years. The device came to life with a soft glow, battery still somehow holding a charge. On the back, scratched into the casing, was a number. Derek had never forgotten what Khalid had said. The debt can never be repaid, but it can be honored. He'd saved Khalid's entire family that day in Kandahar. Pulled them from a building seconds before an airstrike leveled it, based on intelligence Derek had personally verified as faulty. He'd risked court-martial, his career, everything. And Khalid, who turned out to be far more than the simple shopkeeper he'd appear to be, had given him the phone. If you ever need anything at all, Derek dialed the number. It rang 3 times. A voice answered in Pashto, a language Derek still understood. "Who is this?" "Someone who once helped a friend," Derek replied in the same language. "Someone calling in a debt." There was a long pause. "Then what do you need?" Derek looked toward his house, where his 9-year-old son lay broken because of one man's cruelty and untouchable arrogance. Thought about the police who wouldn't help. The system that protected the powerful. "Information first," Derek said. "Then perhaps more. I'll send you details." "The debt will be honored," the voice said. "This I swear." Derek ended the call, his mind already working through the logistics. He'd spent years in tactical planning, in mission preparation. This wouldn't be rushed, wouldn't be sloppy. Vernon Tate thought his connections made him untouchable. He thought the law was his shield, his position was his armor. But Derek had learned long ago that there were things beyond the law. Forces that didn't care about judicial titles or political connections. He put the satellite phone back in its wrapping and returned it to the cabinet. Then he went inside to check on his son. Ethan was sleeping fitfully, his casted arm propped on pillows. Derek sat beside him, gently brushing hair from his forehead. "I'm gonna make this right," he whispered. "I promise." The next 2 weeks were consumed with Ethan's recovery. 2 surgeries, pins, and plates to hold the bones together. Physical therapy that made the kid grit his teeth against pain no 9-year-old should have to endure. Derek took time off from his contracting business to be there for every appointment, every session. Erica had stopped speaking to her father. Marcia called daily, crying, begging her daughter to forgive Vernon, insisting it was all a terrible accident. Erica listened to her mother's pleas with dead eyes and said nothing. Derek watched his wife break a little more each day, caught between her love for her child and the pain of losing her parents. It hardened his resolve. On the 14th day, Derek received a text message from an unknown number. "Information ready. Secure line available." That night, Derek told Erica he needed to make a supply run, drove to a parking lot 40 minutes from their house, and made a call on the satellite phone. Khalid's voice was smooth, educated, a far cry from the frightened shopkeeper Derek had pulled from the rubble. "Your Vernon Tate is an interesting man," Khalid said. 30 years as a district court judge. Retired 5 years ago with full honors. But before that, 7 complaints of bias suppressed. 3 allegations of taking bribes from wealthy defendants, all dismissed. A sexual harassment claim from a court clerk that disappeared from records. And currently, he sits on the board of 2 private prisons and has investments in a construction company that receives state contracts he helped award. Derek absorbed this. So he's corrupt. Very, but protected. His connections run deep, political, legal, financial. The kind of man who has leverage on everyone who might threaten him. "He broke my son's arm," Derek said quietly. "The police refused to act because of who he is." There was a pause. "I see. What would you like to happen?" Derek had been thinking about this question for 2 weeks. Had turned it over in his mind during sleepless nights, examined it from every angle. "I want him to understand fear," Derek said finally. "Real fear. The kind you feel when you're powerless and someone bigger than you has you in their grip. I want him to know what it feels like to have no protection, no connections, no one coming to help. This can be arranged. I don't want him killed," Derek clarified. "Not directly, but I want him gone. Disappeared in a way that sent a message." Khalid was quiet for a moment. "You understand what you're asking?" "I do. This debt, it will be paid in full. There will be no ties back to you. But once done, it cannot be undone." Derek thought of Ethan, of his son's screams as the bones were set, of his tears during physical therapy. Thought of Vernon's smug face in the hospital, his confidence that he was untouchable. "I understand," Derek said. I call the debt. Then consider it paid, Khalid replied. Vernon Tate owns a cabin in the Adirondacks. He goes there alone every few months. I have the location, the schedule. In 48 hours, he will make his regular trip. After that, he will not return. How will you? Don't ask questions you don't want answers to, Khalid interrupted gently. Trust that it will be handled professionally, cleanly, and that there will be no evidence connecting you to his disappearance. Your part in this is done. Derek felt a strange sense of calm settle over him. Thank you. No, Khalid said. Thank you. For my wife, for my children. This is small repayment for the life debt I owe you. The call ended. Derek sat in his truck for a long time, staring at the satellite phone. He just set in motion something irreversible. Had crossed a line he could never uncross. But when he drove home and found Ethan awake, asking for water, struggling to grip the cup with his still healing arm, Derek felt no regret. Only a cold certainty that justice, real justice, sometimes had to exist outside the boundaries of law. Vernon Tate left for his cabin on a Friday afternoon. Marcia had called Erica that morning, mentioning in passing that Vernon was taking a few days to clear his head. Erica had shared this information with Derek without emotion, and Derek had simply nodded. 48 hours. Khalid had said 48 hours. Derek went about his day normally. Took Ethan to physical therapy. Reviewed blueprints for a new construction project. Made dinner with Erica, the two of them moving around each other with the careful choreography of a long marriage under strain. Saturday passed. Sunday. Monday morning, Derek's phone rang. Marcia, hysterical. He's missing, she sobbed. Vernon didn't come home. I called the cabin, and there's no answer. I drove up there myself, and his car is there, but he's not, and the door was open and... Slow down. Marcia, Erica said, putting the call on speaker. What happened? I called the police. They found his car at the cabin. Found some of his belongings. But Vernon is gone. Just gone. No signs of struggle. No blood. Nothing. It's like he just walked away and vanished. Derek watched his wife's face, saw the conflict there, worry for her father warring with anger over what he'd done to Ethan. I'm sure he'll turn up, Derek said evenly. Maybe he went for a hike and got turned around. Vernon doesn't hike, Marcia said. He hates the woods. Something happened to him, I know it. The police investigation would find exactly what Khalid had promised. Nothing. Vernon Tate had driven to his cabin, entered it, and then seemingly ceased to exist. His car was there. His phone was there. His wallet and keys were on the kitchen counter. But Vernon himself was gone. Search parties combed the woods. Helicopters with thermal imaging swept the area. Divers checked the nearby lake. They found nothing. Days turned into weeks. The case, as Derek had known it would, went cold. Without a body, without evidence of foul play, without witnesses, there was nothing to investigate. Vernon Tate had simply disappeared. 2 months later, Derek stood in his backyard watching Ethan throw a tennis ball for their new dog. A golden retriever puppy, Erica, had surprised the kid with to celebrate his arm finally healing. Ethan's cast was off now, his arm almost back to full strength. The kid was smiling again, laughing when the puppy tumbled over its own feet. Erica came out to join him, slipping her hand into his. The police officially closed the investigation today, she said quietly. They're calling it a missing person case, but... She trailed off. How are you doing with that? Derek asked. I don't know. Erica watched their son play, her expression complicated. Part of me is devastated. He was my father. But another part remembers what he did to Ethan. What he was like all those years. And I can't help thinking. She looked at Derek. This sounds terrible, but I can't help thinking we're better off. Derek squeezed her hand. Said nothing. The police asked if we thought anyone might have had reason to harm him. Erica continued. Mentioned that there were people he'd sentenced over the years who might hold grudges. But they said without evidence, without anything pointing to a specific person. Without evidence. It's just speculation, Derek finished. They asked about you specifically, Erica said, and Derek felt his pulse quicken slightly. Asked if you had any military connections who might have helped you retaliate for Ethan. What did you tell them? I told him you were a contractor who spent his days building houses and his nights helping our son with homework. That you're the gentlest man I know. She turned to face him fully. That you'd never hurt anyone. Derek met her eyes and saw knowledge there. Not facts, not evidence, but understanding. Erica knew him well enough to know that he would do anything to protect their family. Smart enough to know that his past had given him capabilities she probably didn't want to fully examine. But she was also pragmatic enough to know that some questions were better left unasked. I wouldn't hurt anyone who didn't deserve it, Derek said carefully. Erica nodded slowly. My mother called yesterday. She's thinking about selling the house, moving to Florida to live near her sister. Says there are too many memories here. How do you feel about that? Relieved, Erica admitted. Is that awful? My father is missing, probably dead, and I'm relieved my mother is leaving. You're relieved that the source of pain in your life is being removed, Derek said. That's not awful. That's healthy. They stood together in the fading afternoon light, watching their son play. Safe, happy, healing. Later that night, after Ethan was asleep, Derek went to his garage one final time. He took out the satellite phone, removed the battery, and used a hammer to methodically destroy every component. Then he scattered the pieces in 3 different dumpsters across town over the next week. There was no need for it anymore. The debt had been paid. Justice of a sort had been served. And if Vernon Tate's disappearance remained an unsolved mystery, well, sometimes mysteries were better than answers. Derek returned to his life, to building houses and raising his son and loving his wife. He slept soundly at night, his conscience clear, because in the end, he'd done what any father would do. He'd protected his child from a predator. The fact that the predator had worn a judge's robe didn't change the fundamental equation. 3 months after Vernon's disappearance, a package arrived at Derek's construction office. Inside was a small envelope with no return address. Derek opened it in his truck alone. A single photograph. A man who might have been Vernon Tate, might have been someone else entirely, standing in what looked like a remote village somewhere in the Middle East. His head was shaved, he wore simple clothes, and his eyes held an expression Derek had seen before. The broken gaze of someone who'd learned they weren't special after all. Beneath the photo, a note in English, serving his community, teaching him humility. The debt is paid. Derek burned the photograph and the note in a barrel behind his work site. Watched the flames consume the only evidence of what he'd set in motion. Then he drove home to his family. 6 months later, Erica received a letter from a lawyer in Pakistan. Vernon Tate's life insurance policy had paid out. He'd been legally declared dead after 6 months of no contact, no bank activity, no evidence of life. The payout was substantial. Erica donated every penny to a children's hospital and a charity for victims of domestic violence. I don't want his money, she told Derek. I don't want anything from him anymore. Derek understood. But privately, he thought Vernon would have hated knowing his insurance money went to help the vulnerable. The kind of people he'd spent his life looking down on, using his power to intimidate. It felt like a fitting final insult. Ethan was 10 now, his arm fully healed. He'd started Little League. His choice this time, not anyone else's. He wasn't particularly good at it, but he enjoyed being part of the team. Derek went to every game, cheered for every hit, helped him practice in the backyard. Sometimes Ethan would ask about Grandpa Vernon. Erica would explain gently that Grandpa had gone missing, that they didn't know where he was, that sometimes people just disappeared. Ethan would nod solemnly, then go back to whatever he was doing. Kids were resilient that way. One evening, when Ethan was 11, he came to Derek with a question that made Derek's heart stop. Dad, did you do something to Grandpa Vernon after he hurt me? Derek studied his son's face. Ethan was growing up, getting smarter, making connections. He deserved honesty, to a point. Why do you ask? I heard Mom talking to Aunt Kristen on the phone. She said she didn't want to know what happened, but she was glad it did. What did that mean? Derek chose his words carefully. Sometimes in life, Ethan, people do bad things and the regular rules don't stop them. Sometimes they have too much power or too many connections, or they're too good at hiding what they really are. Like Grandpa Vernon, Ethan said, yes. And when that happens, when someone hurts someone you love and no one will help, You have to make a choice. You can accept that some people are above the law, or you can find another way to make things right. Did you find another way? Derek looked at his son, 11 years old, thoughtful, learning about the world's complexities. I made sure you were safe. That's what fathers do. They protect their children, no matter what it takes. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. I'm glad he's gone, he said finally. I know I shouldn't say that. I know he was family. But I'm glad. That doesn't make you a bad person, Derek said. That makes you honest about your feelings. He scared me, Ethan admitted, even before he broke my arm. The way he looked at me, talked about me. Like I wasn't good enough. Like I'd never be good enough. Derek pulled his son into a hug. You're more than good enough. You're exactly who you're supposed to be. And anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve space in your life. They sat together on the porch, father and son, watching the sun set. Dad, Ethan asked after a while, if someone tried to hurt me again, would you protect me again? Always, Derek said without hesitation. Always. Ethan nodded, satisfied. Good. Because I know you can. I know you're not just a contractor who builds houses. I know you used to do other things. Important things. How do you know that? I'm 11, not stupid, Ethan said with a slight smile. Plus, I found your medals in the garage. Look them up online. You're kind of a badass, Dad. Derek couldn't help but laugh. Don't let your mother hear you using that language. She knows too, Ethan said. We all know. We just don't talk about it. But it's okay. I'm glad you're tough. I'm glad you can protect us. That night, Derek told Erica about the conversation. What did you tell him? She asked. The truth, mostly. That I protect him no matter what. Erica was quiet for a long time. I used to think I wanted a normal life. A husband who worked 9 to 5, came home, didn't have secrets or a dangerous past. And now I'm grateful I have a husband who loves his son enough to cross any line to keep him safe. She took Derek's hand. I don't want to know the details. I don't need to, but I'm not stupid either. My father disappeared, and I know that doesn't just happen randomly. Erica, I'm not asking you to confirm anything, she interrupted. I'm just saying, thank you for doing what needed to be done, for being the kind of man who can make the hard choices. Derek kissed her forehead. I'd do it again in a heartbeat. I know, she said, and that's exactly why I love you. Years passed. Ethan grew into a confident teenager, then a young man. He went to college, studied architecture, came home for holidays with stories and laughter. The broken arm was just a scar now, a faint line that reminded Derek of the day everything changed. Vernon Tate remained officially missing. Marcia had died 3 years after his disappearance. A heart attack, sudden and mercifully quick. She'd spent her final years a shadow of herself, never quite recovering from losing Vernon. Derek felt no guilt about that. Marcia had enabled Vernon's cruelty for decades, had stood by while he bullied and intimidated. She'd made her choices too. Erica had inherited the house, sold it immediately, and donated half the proceeds to charity. The other half went into Ethan's college fund. Derek's contracting business thrived. He hired veterans when he could, gave them second chances, understood their struggles in ways civilian employers couldn't, built a reputation for quality work and fair dealing. Life moved forward. Sometimes Derek would dream about Afghanistan, about Khalid and his family, about the choices he'd made, the lines he'd crossed. But he never dreamed about Vernon. Vernon Tate had simply ceased to exist in Derek's world, as thoroughly as he'd ceased to exist in the physical one. On Ethan's 21st birthday, father and son sat on that same porch where they'd had their conversation a decade earlier. You turn out pretty good, kid, Derek said, handing Ethan a beer. Thanks, Dad. You didn't do too bad yourself. Ethan clinked his bottle against Derek's. Can I ask you something? And will you give me an honest answer? Depend on the question. What happened to Grandpa Vernon? Derek studied his son's face. Ethan was a man now, old enough to handle truth. Why do you want to know? Because I'm not a kid anymore. Because I want to understand what kind of man my father is. The full picture. Derek took a long drink, considering. Then, your grandfather broke your arm in 3 places because I dared to stand up to him. Because in his world, power meant he could hurt people without consequences. The police wouldn't help. The law protected him. So I found another way. You had him killed. No, Derek said truthfully. I called in a debt from my time in Afghanistan, from someone whose life I'd saved. I asked for Vernon to disappear, to learn what it felt like to be powerless. What happened after that? I don't know the specifics. Don't want to know. Ethan nodded slowly. Good. Good. He deserved it. More than that, really. You protected me. Showed me that you'd go to the ends of the earth to keep me safe. That's what a father does. Derek felt something tight in his chest loosen. I've never regretted it. Never will. I know. Ethan smiled. Because you're Derek McConnell. You're the guy who saved a family in Kandahar when you could have looked the other way. The guy who built a business from nothing. The guy who taught his son to be strong and kind and to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. You make me sound better than I am. No, Ethan said. I make you sound exactly like you are. A good man who does hard things when necessary. The kind of man I want to be. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out. Are there any other dark secrets I should know about? Ethan asked lightly. Derek laughed. None that affect you. The satellite phone is destroyed. The debt is paid. Vernon is gone. That chapter is closed. And if someone threatens our family again, then we deal with it, Derek said simply. Together. You're old enough now to be part of those decisions. Ethan nodded, satisfied. I hope it never comes to that. But if it does, I'm glad you're my dad. Derek pulled his son into a one-armed hug. This young man he'd raised, protected, taught. I'm proud of you, Ethan. So damn proud. Right back at you, old man. They finished their beers in the gathering dark. Two men who understood that sometimes justice existed outside the law, that sometimes protection required crossing lines that couldn't be uncrossed. And Derek McConnell, former special operations soldier, contractor, father, husband, he slept soundly that night, his conscience clear. Because in the end, he'd done exactly what he was supposed to do. He'd protected his son from a monster. And the world was better for Vernon Tate's absence. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.